Hello, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us today for our masterclass. The topic for our masterclass today is Defend Your Profits with Digital Deductions. And as we get started, I would like to request all of you to please be on mute. And if you do have any questions, post them on the chat window to the host, and we will take those questions sequentially at the end of the session. Now, as we get started with our masterclass, let me now invite Diane Crow. She's the Regional Director, NACM Southwest. She's the speaker for today's masterclass. And Diane draws upon her experience in credit management. She has a very deep understanding in collections and deductions management, along with her customer member-centric style to support the NACM membership. In addition to her operational experience, she is a sought-after speaker and presenter, drawing upon her strong background in training and education. Diane has enjoyed leading webinars and on-site sessions on a wide variety of topics for many NACM industry credit groups, conferences, and NACM Credit Congress. Diane holds a BS in Organization Management. With this, we are very pleased to have you, Diane, on board for our today's masterclass. I would like to invite you for beginning the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akshay. I appreciate that. And just so everyone knows, it wasn't part of my bio, although there's lots in that bio, right? I always love hearing those things, write about yourself in third person, right? But I did spend 24 years working for a company that specialized in deduction outsourcing. So I've worked deductions, dealt with deductions for a long time. And so I just want to share a little bit of my experience and thoughts on that in conjunction with, of course, automation through Emagia as well. So today we're going to talk a little bit about deductions, some of the specific challenges that they present, the realities of processing deductions, and then, of course, how we can utilize that to defend the profit margin. And then we'll wrap everything up and take your questions. Okay, so without further ado, because I know we're on a limited time frame here, so we want to move forward. All right, so when we talk about deductions, they can get called any number of things, right? They are sometimes called chargebacks, they're short pays, but at the end of the day, it essentially means that the customer has either short paid an invoice for various and sundry reasons, or they've taken a separate credit on their remittance, which may or may not be tied to an invoice that's actually being paid on that invoice. So that starts with some of the fun challenges that we have when we're getting with deductions. And these reasons can vary. I mean, I've talked to groups over the years, and some of them have as few as 10 reason codes for deductions, and others have as few as 50 or more. So a lot of it depends on the product and the type of services and things that you're providing. But it can be anything from shortages, promotions, advertising, compliance charges are, of course, a huge area for deductions. Pricing is a big one, and we're going to talk specifically about some of those coming up in the next few minutes. So, but regardless of whether you have 10 or whether you have 100 reasons for your deduction codes, we want to think of them in two big categories for right now, because how we approach them and what our objectives are for them vary greatly depending on whether they are planned deductions or unplanned deductions. And specifically as it relates to our profit margin, we need to understand which deductions fall in which category, and when we're looking at processing them and where we want to spend our time, that comes into play. So when we think about planned deductions, these are typically those promotional deductions, things that are authorized in advance, and they're typically very large amounts, right? And they comprise a very high percentage of our total deduction value, maybe not in quantity, but definitely in dollars, right? So when we're thinking about that, and when we start talking about how to be strategic, we want to make sure we understand that there are planned and there are unplanned, and that those unplanned deductions are the ones that significantly impact our profit margins and our bottom line. And those are how we have to start thinking strategically about those things, because it can have a substantial financial impact, right? I mean, 2 to 3% of your gross margin can be eroded with deductions. It impacts our productivity. If we're spending a lot of time doing very administrative and reactive type tasks, that takes away and it just impacts your organization on so many levels. And of course, there's a potential misrepresentation of your AR. Again, those promotion and advertising dollars are substantial, but they're not really receivables, right? It's a matter of we have to get them identified matched to the proper program or GL and then credited off our system, we're not actually expecting money to come in for those type of deductions because they've already been planned and there's something that your customer has earned. Okay, so when we look at the reality of processing deductions, right, it can be a very low value activity. And this is where, as we start to talk about, proactive versus reactive and strategic versus administrative, these are when we start really thinking about these types of issues, because 95% of the time or more in some cases, they're valid. And when we say valid, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually valid. It could just simply mean that they've been resolved in favor of your customer. If you can't prove something or can't, sometimes you accept deductions as a cost of doing business. So valid is kind of a general term we're using here, but basically it means that it's resolved in favor of your customer 95% of the time, right? And it can vary by industry. But that's a generally accepted number. They're large volumes, oftentimes lower balances, especially with those unplanned deductions. And of course, the time, both in your personnel hours and the cost that it can have to your company with resolving this, it could potentially, again, if a lot of your deductions are those advertising and planned things, it has minimal impact to the bottom line because those have already been factored in. So we have to switch our focus from reactive to proactive, because if we want to think about this wisely and make sure that we're utilizing all the tools available to us, and we're going to talk about that, and of course that is going to include the use of automation for many of those tasks. But if we can do that efficiently and effectively, it not only helps your employees' morale, the productivity, but your customers, because when we start thinking about deductions in their original form, deductions were designed to bring to a company's attention something that wasn't right, whether pricing was off, the way you were shipping it was wrong, any number of things. And so they used those deductions to bring something to your attention. So in theory, when we think about it, the more we get right up front, the less that the customer gets things that are wrong. And so that's going to increase their customer satisfaction, right? So we want to think about that as well too, because it affects many areas. All right, and we're going to do a quick survey here. So, and then I'll pick back up after that. Okay, thank you. And that's good. We definitely want to, be able to, and that's good that you're being proactive as much as possible, because when we start to think about deductions and defending the profit margins, again, as I mentioned earlier, all deductions are not created equal. All right, so we have the two areas, the planned and the unplanned. But then when we look at those in a different way, we have those intentional deductions, and these are the planned ones, right? Those are our budgeted, pre-authorized. They're already factored into our profit margins. So there's an indirect impact on the profit. It doesn't really, affect it a lot, other than that misrepresentation of the AR that we mentioned earlier. So obviously our objective in that is speed and resolution. So, these are agreed upon discounts. They are the, advertising, promo, rebates, all those type of things typically fall in that area. So then we move in from intentional to preventable. And this is a big key area that you want to focus on when you're wanting to be proactive in your deduction management. And these are things like the compliance violations. And I know any of you who've worked deductions at any point in time, you kind of laugh and you're like, Diana, have you seen those routing guides the customers give us? Trying to accommodate every single one of their demands can be daunting. And so I understand, in theory, these things are preventable. You may, as an organization, decide to take some of these deductions as a cost of doing business, and then your goal is going to be to mitigate those costs as much as possible by getting concessions and agreements from your customers about things that they want that just aren't doable. You can't have a separate, thing for every single customer. So you have to take the majority of them and get them in. But in theory, we can prevent compliance violations. And of course, pricing. For those of you who have been in deductions for any length of time, you might be aware that there is a study that has been done, at least to my knowledge, every 3 years for going back at least probably 15 to 20 years. And each time they always ask, different questions, but they always want to know when it comes to volume, and quantity with regards to, the amount and then the number, pricing always is at the top when it comes to the number of deductions, which when you think about it is crazy, because we should be able to, as an organization, take steps to prevent those pricing deductions from ever happening. We have to make sure, our customers get notified in time. We have to make sure that our pricing is correct. Sometimes it's your own pricing that didn't get updated. But then the other thing is stopping it. Like when the order comes in, if the pricing isn't right, that's the critical place. You want to stop that before it ever becomes a deduction, because once it does, getting pricing deductions paid back is very challenging, simply because the customer typically responds, "Well, you accepted my PO." So we have to make sure. So these are some things that are preventable because they have a direct impact on profit. We expect that the customer is going to pay the amount that we invoice them for, and they're not going to be taking deductions. I've seen compliance deductions come in, especially in the apparel industry, that far exceed the amount of the invoice by the time they're finished taking all the deductions. And so we have to work hard to prevent those type of things. And that takes time and energy from our staff. So this is why we're going to talk about some other ways, by using automation and some other methods, that we want to make sure that the time we have to spend on them get us the best possible results. And then, of course, we have those unauthorized claims. These are the violations, and I like to call them the games that our customers play. All right. And those have both a direct and indirect impact on the profit, because sometimes, they might be for things like, for instance, a post audit. If any of you have to deal with those, that is an area where we want to make sure that we quickly resolve those. And the key part here is we have to educate our customers. They have to be aware of what our tolerances are. And we're going to talk about some things that you can do here in just a few minutes, but understand that it's important that when your customer may send you test deductions, they may try things just to see, that old adage, they throw it up against the wall to see what sticks. I mean, they want oftentimes to make profit, and we're not oftentimes, all the time, but sometimes I know those of us who've worked in deductions for a long time feel like it's a profit center for our customers, right, with the way that they behave and the things that they do. So we have to make sure that we quickly resolve those type of issues, and that we have that we educate our customers as to our tolerances. So when we look at reactive versus proactive, again, we mentioned that high volume of processing, which ultimately results in 95% of those claims being resolved in favor of our customers. It's written off, it's validated, it's credited, whatever the end result may be. At the end of the day, it's not money that comes back to your bottom line, right? So, and oftentimes deductions are not high on the priority list. We have very few resources to allocate to it. So it makes it really hard to get ahead of the curve, right? So we spend a lot of time reacting to things that have happened rather than being proactive, being able to prevent them from ever showing up on our aging in the first place. Because we always said, getting a deduction paid back is fantastic. Having that deduction never happen in the first place, even better, right? So we want to make sure that we do that. And we certainly do not want to become a target for abuse from our customers. Whether things just don't get addressed, they slip through the cracks, we just, maybe they got written off in an under tolerance type level with, depending on where that's at. So we have to be very careful and make sure that we switch from being reactive to proactive. So we're all working very hard, right? So we want to make sure that we're working smarter and utilizing our time efficiently when we're dealing with this. So one of the ways that we can do that is we have to eliminate gray areas and increase the clarity in our contracts. Let me give you an example. One of the clients that our company was working for back many years ago, they had offered in their contract, basically they said, if you increase your sales from this year to the next year by X percentage, we are going to give you a rebate. And it was substantial. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars that the customer was going to get. The problem is that the contract was not clear about what constituted those two numbers for comparison and what got pulled out. So like, for instance, if you're deducting for pricing deductions, that lowers the value of what your sales were. If you're deducting for shortages, I mean, the list goes on, but that was not specified. And long story short, it took us over 1.5 years to get that resolved. And at the end of the day, it was resolved in favor of the customer. So, we could have avoided a lot of those issues by making sure that we had eliminated those things as much as possible. You also have to make sure that, again, when you're thinking of your deductions in those different buckets, that there are certain types of claims that cannot be ignored because they will set you up to become a target. That includes post audits. If you get those in your industry, you definitely need to be paying attention no matter what the dollar value is, because third-party auditors who your customers are hiring, they have nothing more to do but then to try to come up with ways to get money because they get a percentage of the amounts that they get to deduct from you. And if they have to pay you back, that means that gets taken from their commission. So they are fully vested in making sure they have built a case. So that means that if they're trying something new, they may come in at small dollar amounts. They may send tests. They think maybe their tolerance is $100. So we're going to send some claims in for like 99 or maybe $99.50. They're going to try different things. And they'll do that several times. And then if you don't address those because you haven't even seen them because your tolerance is there, right? Then they're going to take a big deduction. And when you then fight it, they're going to say to the buyer who has to approve that payback, hey, listen, we've been deducting for this types of claims for months now. Nobody said a word. Now, because the dollar amount is increased, now everybody cares more. So we have to make sure that post audits and compliance charges, we have to educate the customer on what our tolerances are. And so we have to be proactive in dealing with those type of issues. So you can use things like percent of sales analysis to better focus on the problems. If customer A and customer B are in the same buying tiers and one of them has compliance deductions that are 0.6% of sales and the other is 0.3% of sales, obviously there's an issue with customer A. So focus your time there. If everyone else is in that same bracket, of percentage, then you know that the problem lies with the customer, not necessarily with yours, and that's how you can be proactive. And of course, anything you can do to improve order fulfillment and invoicing accuracy, eliminate those type of claims up front. And, so there's definitely tools available to you through automation and other things that can help you be more effective in those areas. So when we continue talking about being proactive, we want to create policies and best practices, and you have to make sure everybody knows what those are and has access to them, because a lot of deduction claims come down to policy versus policy. But newsflash, if you don't have any policies and they're not written and they haven't been communicated to your customer, you are at a definite disadvantage before you even get started on those discussions. So make sure that all of your employees that are involved in the process, and that could be everybody from order entry, if they get a pricing deduction, what's the policy? What do we do? Who gets notified of that? How do we record that? How do we make sure we let everyone know that that customer was advised that that price was wrong? Okay, so, make sure everyone understands the process along the way, because even though deductions show up on the aging for the AR person or the credit person, it's something that, involves many different departments throughout the company. And so everyone has to be on board to make that work. Look at those write-off thresholds. As we talked about, there are different companies that are going to test those different levels. John and I had a long conversation about the different levels for that and how those should be evaluated and how they should be reviewed and how they should be monitored, because they can become a big source of a problem for companies. We understand the need for it. I totally get it. You don't want to be spending a lot of time on something that's $40, but every once in a while, you've got to spot check and test some of those and reevaluate where that is and move it every once in a while just to keep your customers guessing, okay? And of course, obviously, you want to utilize automation to help you get ahead of the curve. And we're going to talk specifically about some of the things that you can do with that. So when we think about deductions, obviously, there is a lot of manual processing, right? I mean, this comes down to, it gets started with cash application, right? If cash application isn't done correctly and those deductions aren't set up appropriately, you're already starting at a significant disadvantage. So cash application is a key place to start in that proactive thing. And then, of course, we want those deductions created and identified, all right? Because as we mentioned here later in the slide, unknown deduction codes, I mean, the theory is, and well, it's not even theory, it's a good management practice, is that you can't manage it if you don't measure it. And you can't measure something that hasn't been identified. You don't even know what it is. I talked to one potential client one time, and 98% of their deduction balance was coded as unidentified. Like, you can't even begin to fix something if you don't know what it is. So that was the first thing they needed to do, right? So you want to automate as much of that process as you can and utilize the resources that are there to help you, so they can create and identify deductions. They can go and get the backup from all those customer portals, right? That's where everyone is keeping everything, all of your customers. So you have to be able to go get that and then attach it to the deductions, so that by the time your staff is actively involved in it, we already know what it is, how much it is, and perhaps depending on the type of deductions and the processes that you've set up, it could already be routed to someone for review or possible approval. So, there's a way that you can eliminate so much of that manual processing work that is low value activity, right? Because you want your employees focused on high value strategic things that are going to make a difference at the end of the day. So, and again, we know that so many companies are going through acquisition and mergers these days, right? So, and you have so many ERP systems. So having something that can pull everything together up in a cloud and let you look at it and get a good feel for where you're at is powerful as well. All right. So, so workflow, identification of deductions, eliminating a lot of that low value activity. That's how AI powered digital automation can help in this area of deductions. Right. So here's a quick success story that Emagia provided. We can see same type of thing. They had SAP deployed over 30 countries, multiple languages. They just, everything was everywhere. So Emagia came in and were able to provide them with AI-powered deductions, cash applications, collections, and analytics. And then what the result of that was, of course, is they reduced their resolution time down to 5 days, which is incredible. Their auto cash hit rate increased from 50 to 80%, and DSO was reduced as well. And I'm sure that Emagia would be happy to provide more details about all those specifics about how they did that. But you can see, by utilizing automation to rid yourselves of those low value processing type side of things, that frees up your team to be more strategic and value added and can make a significant impact in your customer value. So when you have a well-executed deduction management process, right? So you're going to improve your margins, make sure that they're protected. You're going to be having your team work on more strategic and value-added things. You want them to be able to, really work with the customers and make a difference, and they can be proactive to get ahead of the game with everything, right? You get quicker resolution, improved prevention, which means your AR aging looks better. You're not going to have things on your aging that don't belong there, right? Because they've been identified and quantified and moved off as they're supposed to be to the proper GL. And it helps your customers, they're happier when things move smoothly and they're not being asked multiple times for different things. If you're easier to deal with, we talk about, tell people that automation is happening in, AR. It has been for quite some time, but at the end of the day, if you're selling the same product as someone else or service, and it's easier to do business with you because company A has automation versus company B who doesn't, and everything else is equal, a lot of times a company is going to go with a company that has automation because, again, it's just smoother, it's easier to do business with. There's a reason that I do so much business with the likes of Amazon, because I can just say to my digital assistant what I need, and then 2 days later, it's on my desktop, right? It's on my doorstop. So, you have to take those things into account to make sure that, you're increasing your customer loyalty, perhaps even increasing market share. But of course, obviously, at the end of the day, the increased revenue and profit, protecting that bottom line is what's critically important, right? Question. So I think I did okay on time.
Absolutely, Dan.
They told me
absolutely, Dan. We are ready for the questions. I would again like to remind all the participants to see if we can post any questions that they have on the chat window to the host. So I have a few questions, Diane, over here. Sure. Let me bring up the first one for you. What percentage of invalid deductions have companies been able to recover from their customers?
That's a great question, and one I got asked a lot when I was in the deduction business. And honestly, it varies, right? Because it depends on the type of deduction, and of course, the level of documentation that you have, the policies and procedures that are in place by the company. But the range can be anywhere from 5 to 20%. Now, 20% is more the exception. 5 is more the general rule, anywhere from 5 to 8%. But I have seen them as high as 20% when a customer, had their ducks in a row. A lot of times that deals with customers who have a lot of shortage deductions. We were able to be very successful on their behalf. But I would say anywhere from 5 to 20%, given those parameters and factors that we talked about.
Thank you, Diane. The next question is I think this is going to be with everybody, right? I mean, we're all talking about AI-powered digital deductions. And then the question is about, okay, what parts of the end-to-end processing of deductions can AI-powered digital deductions processing automate?
Sure, and that makes sense. Almost all your activities leading up to that final resolution step, so we've got the creation of the deduction. That's a huge time sucker that, people can spend a lot of time on and have their team spend a lot of time on, but that can be automated. So the creation of it, the categorizing of it, getting the documentation. Again, if you don't know what it is, you can't even begin to solve it, right? Assigning reason codes and then routing, all of those are key things that AI automation can help with. And then, once it's been determined that something is valid, getting it routed for credit memo approval, getting it to the right collector if it's invalid, so you can start that collection process as quickly as possible, because, unlike wine and cheese, deductions don't get any sweeter with age, right? So we have to make sure that we get those to the proper people. So, getting them cleared, reporting, and of course, analytics, because we want to understand where our problems are so we can take steps to prevent them. So, I think that based on the information, that Emagia, through the studies they've done and things, there can be an overall 70 to 80% productivity improvement that's available. So, but the key part is identifying what can automation do versus what you need your strategic employees to do. And that's, the human judgment. They can help make those critical decisions and the more complex things, but they have time to do that now because the automatic processing has freed them up to focus more on those type of issues.
The next question is that what are the top 2 or 3 things that I need to do in order to move my department from reactive to proactive when dealing with deductions?
Sure. Yeah. If you're going to start somewhere, you're like, where do I need to start to make the most impact? So obviously the things that are more repetitive, non-value adding steps in that resolution process, you start with Cash App, you got to get that right to begin with so that you can know what you're absolutely dealing with. Making sure your team is educated in the processes and policies and helping them understand what those value added activities are. Because a lot of times when automation is introduced, your team that's currently doing all these things get worried, right? They get nervous about, am I being replaced? And the thing that we want to make sure is that our team understands that we want to move you to more strategic value added things as opposed to just the administrative type issues. And so making sure that we do that and educate, not only your internal team on things, but also then starting to educate your customers on what your tolerances are. And then of course, using those percent of sales analysis that we talked about and being able to prioritize the issues that you're dealing with, that'll help move you from being reactive to proactive. And, as you just continue to move forward, you take steps one at a time. But those are some of the first things that I would recommend that are critical to being able to move from reactive to proactive.
Thank you very much, Diane. I think that brings up to the end of the session over here. We are through with our 30-minute slot for today. And I would like to thank you very much for taking us through the value-added data points that would really help in improving the overall deductions processing in the organizations or companies. And I really appreciate all your viewpoints and suggestions. And I'd like to also thank the audience over here who have joined us today, and appreciate all your patience and the good questions, the great questions that you have put forward to Diane. In case if you do have any other additional questions, please feel free to send your questions over an email. Our email is info@emagia.com. And I would also like to take this opportunity to invite you all again for our next masterclass, which is going to be on May 6th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. The topic for our next masterclass is paperless financial operations with Jira Docs. So look forward to seeing you all over there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, John. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.